So, today is going to be a very different video. And why is it going to be different? Well, let me tell you, because today we are actually going to be doing a discussion on Jujutsu Kaisen. And the most recent chapter has come out. So be prepared, because there's a lot to talk about in this chapter. And we're going to talk about it right now, right after the intro. Hey guys, how's it going? It is your boy, Big Blue Drew 97 here, coming at you with a discussion video. This time discussing a lot of the information that we learned in the most recent chapter of Jujutsu Kaisen, manga chapter 146. And yes, I'm finally discussing Jujutsu Kaisen in a more official / conventional / straightforward / I don't know what I'm saying / thing. Yeah, I'm really excited to talk about Jujutsu Kaisen because over the past few chapters we've gotten a whole lot of dialogue, and I decided, hey, maybe I should try to explain and give my thoughts on what has been happening so far and potentially what's going to be happening in the future, starting with chapter 146. And we're going to get into that. But before we do so, I'd like to ask you, if you haven't done so, to subscribe to my YouTube channel, Big Blue Drew 97, and leaving a like and a comment down below about whether or not you want me to continue talking about Jujutsu Kaisen if you like this discussion video, and I'll probably say the exact same thing at the end of this video. So with that out of the way, let's get right into the discussion. For starters, as a summation of everything that has really happened up until this point, Yuji Itadori is the vessel for Sukuna. This has led to a whole lot of stuff happening, which involves the capture of Gojo, the reveal of who the main antagonist is, having Fushiguro Megumi's sister in danger, and Itadori having a brother. Also, the potential extinction of the entirety of the human race, or at the very least, particularly in Japan. And that doesn't even cover what we talked about in this chapter, and even in last chapter, where we got a whole lot of info dump about what Tengen is and his role and everything, and what the true plan of give me a moment, I have to remember his name. It's not Geto who's the main bad guy, but it was also revealed last chapter that the main antagonist isn't Geto, but is actually Kenjaku. That is what his name is. We got the real reveal of, like, the most likely the big antagonist for Jujutsu Kaisen, Kenjaku, but that's not something that I'm going to talk about in this video, because that can be an entire video on its own. But in this video, I specifically want to tackle the important things that we learned in chapter 146. So for starters, something that we didn't inherently just say learn in this chapter, but some stuff that was more discussed in this chapter particularly involves the Culling games and its rules. And particularly what went on in this chapter is that we have all of the characters that are here, Megumi, Itadori, Yuki, Choso, Maki. They're all basically discussing the rules for the Culling game, and basically what they mean, how they should be interpreted, and what it could mean for relatively speaking, for them moving forward, but for us, the story moving forward. And we kind of get a general explanation for everything. We get an explanation for the first rule, which is specific people will awaken their techniques, and they must participate in the Culling game in specific areas within 19 days. And we get the confirmation that from the point of this chapter, 9 days have passed, relatively speaking, and 10 more days need to occur before the Culling game really goes into effect. And going into the second rule, which is tied to the first rule, that for those who break the rule, who gain the curse technique and decide not to participate, they'll be subjected to curse technique removal. And there has been some discussion in the community about what curse technique removal is. And from what we have an understanding of this chapter, it is basically the removal of the actual curse technique from the body, which could lead to the person who has the curse technique's death. And this is something very interesting, because this ties into some information that we actually learned prior that also ties into the Culling game, particularly information that we learned in chapter 136. And this is a really important chapter, so I would ask you, if you haven't done so, to go back and reread this, because we gained a lot of information about the Culling game before the Culling game was actually announced, or before we even know what it was, because we have Jinkaku, because we have Kinjaku, who is currently taking over the body of Geto, basically like give like the number of participants that are going to be in the Culling game for the most part, or at the very least there are going to be 1,000 people that are like Itadori, who are physically strong and can be potential vessels for cursed objects. But we also got an explanation for how the participants are particularly chosen, or who are going to be participating in it, and it's going to be basically people that Kinjaku basically like created and forged to either be vessels of Sukuna or vessels of cursed objects, or humans that had the capability of using cursed techniques, but their brains were wired to be non-sorcerous. And this is very important because this strongly implies and is connected back to the previous chapter of 146, which it's very interesting that we learned this information in 146, and that we also learned similar information in chapter 136, that cursed techniques are directly connected to the brain. So by removing the technique, you are removing something that's in the brain, and if you mess with the brain, you potentially die. So that's a little bit of information that ties back to this chapter, meaning that they also have to figure out that the people who are going to be fighting in this Culling game are not just going to be inherently sorcerers, but are also going to be people like Itadori who are just extremely gifted. And this also ties into another rule of the Culling game, and something that they begin questioning is like, okay, when it comes to the third rule, non-players who enter the colony become players at the moment of entry and shall be considered to have declared participation in the Culling game. And they question whether or not, well, what if like there's someone who like didn't do it, or they actually accidentally wandered into it, and that we also get the rule of that if they accidentally wander into it, there's a one-time chance for them to leave. Because as soon as they basically enter the barrier, it's basically explained that, yeah, once you enter the barrier, you basically are given the choice to stay or leave. And if you stay, you become a participant and are subjected to the rules. But if you decide to leave, you won't be subjected to the rules. So that's very interesting. But I feel as if like the difference would be between like a normal person and someone like Itadori is that if Itadori were to go in there, as well as other Jujutsu sorcerers with cursed techniques, they don't have that opportunity to leave. Once they enter the fray, someone like Itadori or someone with a cursed technique enters the fray, they have to participate in the Culling game. But then this ties into rules 4 and 5, which talks about how players need to accumulate points by killing other players, and that these specific points are based off of whether or not they're a sorcerer or whether or not they're a non-sorcerer. And I think this kind of ties into the idea that from chapter 136, that there are thousands of people who are like Itadori, who are physically strong and physically gifted and could be vessels for cursed objects, and they would be worth 1 point. So at the very least, we know that there's potentially 1,000 points to be earned in this game. And this ties into another rule that we have, is that once you reach 100 points, then you're able to come up with new rules, meaning that at the very least, with that idea in mind and connecting it back to that chapter, there's a possibility that that could be 10 additional rules. 1,000 divided by 100. Yeah, 10. 10 additional rules that could work together in a way to free the Jujutsu sorcerers, or to free the people from having to, kill themselves. And that ties into another one of the Culling game rules, is that you are able to create another rule once you reach 100 points, but then that ties into rule 7, where if you create this rule, it cannot have a long-lasting or a major impact on the Culling game. So, and once they specifically ask what this new rule is, the game master, then they have to accept it. So they're basically talking about the Culling game rules, trying to find ways to get around it. Megumi has a few ideas. He doesn't say what those ideas are, but he may have an idea to like work around it, because the main like focus of this entire conversation is trying to figure out how to free Megumi's sister. And when it comes to this is very interesting, because it gives us the opportunity to think about potentially like questions or rules that we can potentially like say to the ether that can be used in a way to help the people in the story, to help Itadori, to help Fushiguro, Megumi to help Yuta to try and combat the Culling game, because something interesting else that is brought up in this game is that even though Kenjaku may have been the one to activate it in Geto's body, that he is still subjected to the games and rules, and how the Culling game itself isn't a particular individual, but is equated to being like a program, where you could have someone who created the program, but they don't have full control over it. Once it's like let out into the world, they have no control over it, which means Kenjaku, as well as their enemies, are also subjected to the rules, especially Rule 9, which means that if someone remains having the same amount of points for 19 days, they'll face curse technique removal, meaning that Kenjaku has to participate in killing people, which, from what we've seen, he's not afraid to do that, but it means that he is subjected to the rules. Meaning that if they could create a rule that specifically goes against Kenjaku, and let's say there's a rule like anyone under the name of Kenjaku or anyone who's controlling someone's body is subject to immediate curse technique removal, theoretically that could be a rule and could participate, because by doing so it doesn't, from my understanding, wouldn't like necessarily break any of the rules, because particularly when it comes to creating these rules, we have to focus on Rule 7, which basically means that these new rules cannot have a mark or a long-lasting effect on the Culling game, and just removing one person from the game will not have a long-lasting effect. And this could tie into another thing that Fushiguro has in mind, that he could create a rule that once he reaches 100 points, that a character or a person with the name of Sumaki Fushiguro, who has a specific curse technique, can no longer participate in the game with fear of curse technique removal. So there are like workarounds around it, because if you remove one person from a game, it won't have a major effect on the rule, on the game, unless there's a certain amount of people left, where in that case then it will have playing on the rules itself and could affect the game moving forward. So basically they have to act fast, meaning that the characters have to at least kill 100 people to achieve this goal, or to make a rule that will be beneficial for them and potentially save Fushiguro's sister's life. So yeah, for the most part, when it comes to this chapter, a lot of it's just the characters talking about the Culling games and the rules, and for them to have a better understanding of it, and by them having a better understanding of it, we also have a better understanding of it. And from here, they also begin to like somewhat go their separate ways. They begin to like split up towards the end of the chapter, where you have specifically Choso and Yuki, who if you remember from last chapter, were told by Tengen to stay here to basically be guards, because Kenjaku may try to kill and take over Tengu in his presence, basically as a way to turn the world into a form of darkness and cause all the humans to become like a part of like the essence of this cursed spirit, or for the most part just be a part of the world and like not be able to like manifest in their bodies anymore. So they have to basically be bodyguards for it. So they're going to be separated into their own group, basically saving and protecting Tengen. But then you have characters like Maki, who is planning on raiding the Zenin cursed tools storehouse to basically get more cursed tools, because that's what she's going to be using, and also to recruit Panda into the group as well. So she's going to be going on her own. And there's also a funny scene of Itadori asking like, wait one second, she's not the clan leader, then what is she going to do? And Fushiguro is like, I'm going to explain later. So Maki is going to be going on her own as well to do everything else, as well as Yuta is going to go on his own to gain a little bit more information. He's going to force himself to participate in the game, meaning that he most likely may be the first person to occur the 100 points, but he's going to try to get as far away from the group so that they may not participate in the same like Culling game area and potentially have to kill each other. Which brings up another issue that, yeah, Yuta is going to be separated from the main group, but if he is separated from the main group, Itadori may have to come with the idea that, oh, the person that I asked to kill me if Sukuna escapes is not going to be here. This could be foreshadowing that Sukuna may escape from Itadori for a little while, and Yuta's not going to be around to basically attempt to kill him, which is something that is brought up in this chapter. But luckily enough, we have Fushiguro, who's basically like, oh, if that doesn't happen, then I'll make sure if that doesn't happen, if I can't kill you, then Yuta's gonna do it a little bit later, which is funny because it goes against what Itadori wants to do, which is to save Megumi. So we also get that, but this actually ties into something interesting because now we got the group separated. Then you also have Yuta as well as Maki basically asking both Yuji as well as Megumi to go work and find a particular third-year sorcerer that has been suspended, whose name is Genji Hakarai. And this person is very interesting because in this chapter, they basically allude to the idea that he may be even more powerful than Yuta, which Maki says, no, that's just a joke, don't believe him. But there is a possibility that he is on the same level as Yuta, because Yuta is a special grade sorcerer, and whoever this Kenji person is a third year, but he was suspended for some particular reason. And this isn't the first time that we've actually heard his name being said. We actually first hear this name being said by Satoru Gojo, if I remember correctly, during the Cursed training arc, and we get this image of him. And this leads to something very interesting, mainly due to the fact that the first time we sort of get a glimpse of who this Kenji is, what we get in this chapter 146 and what we got when we first saw him, they look like two completely different characters. Now, we do have characters in the story of Noshitori Kamo and Noshitori Kamo who have literally the exact same name and pronounced the exact same way, but they are related by blood and through other means. But yeah, from what we have, yeah, it appears to be two different people with two different designs, but then the same person. I don't know if that is a mistake on Akutami's part. Maybe he decided to change the character after like tinkering with him with a little while up until this moment. It's just a little bit jarring because the main difference is that the one that we see in this chapter has white hair, but the first time we saw him, he had black hair and dreads, and I potentially thought he was black. This character is more white, so I just don't know. But that's just something interesting about this chapter, that potentially he is stronger than Yuta, and maybe potentially even stronger than Gojo. But that is something that isn't really confirmed in this chapter. But the main thing that I really wanted to get to that was confirmed in this chapter actually starts within the last few pages of this chapter, where we get the introduction of another Culling game player of Fumihiko Takaba. And this character is very interesting. And the reason why I say that is he's a failed comedian. That's just very sad. And we get this cool like dialogue between Takaba and like his manager, who are talking about how there are two types of comedians. It's those who are funny and those who think they are funny. And the reason why he brings this up is because he talks about, like, when it comes to talk about this guy, is that there's a 50-50 shot that you're either a comedian that's funny or a comedian that thinks you're funny. And then you have Takaba, who's basically thinking, it's 50-50, but for some kind of reason, I see it more as 70-30. And this is the part of the chapter that just blew my mind, because if you don't understand where that reference is, then let me remind you of a particular individual with a particular curse technique called ratio technique. Specifically, the curse technique of Kento Nanami. You remember Nanami? He was the mentor to Itadori. He fought Mahito that one time. He fought Mahito that second time. And he fought Mahito that third time. Unfortunately, the third time didn't end well, which led to his death. But then you have the end of this chapter, which is interesting, mainly due to the idea of like how we know curse techniques work. Because when it comes to curse techniques, they come in like a few different shapes. You have the first level of a curse technique, which is going to be an innate technique, which is basically the technique that Jujutsu sorcerers are born with and don't develop until an older age. But what is very specific about these curse techniques is that they are specific to the user and can't really be used by particular individuals, with a few exceptions, particularly with Yuta, with his ability to sort of kind of copy curse techniques. But for the most part, if you have an innate technique, that is something that only you can have. Only one person can use that technique, and it's unique to that person. and then you start getting more into the family techniques or inherited techniques that are passed down from generation to generation, like Fushiguro Megumi with his shadow technique, and even with Gojo with his sixth eyes technique. Those are techniques that are passed on to generations and generations. And even last chapter, we got the confirmation that when it comes to specific curse techniques, specifically Gojo's technique, that only one like six-eyed curse technique / person can only exist at a time. Meaning that there's a possibility that curse techniques can be passed down from generation to generation, but that normally entails the idea that they have to be related. And when it comes to this person, there is a possibility that he's related to Nanami through some other means. But what I think is even more interesting that could possibly happen is that because Nanami died, and that he was unable to, like, the last time we saw Nanami is when he was killed by Mahito, and he looked at Itadori and he was sort of kind of curse him, but he was going to say something that could have put a curse on him, but he decided against it. That maybe in that moment, like before he was cursed, in the moment that he died, and because Mahito involves like with soul, with manipulation and body, maybe we could get a little bit more confirmation about this. Maybe curse techniques are linked to the soul, and that when he was killed, his body disappeared, his soul still kind of remained within the cursed spirit like spectrum, and when people were unlocking the techniques brought about by Kenjaku, when he used Mahito's transfiguration technique to unlock the brains or rewire the brains of specific people who had a curse technique but were non-sorcerers in the brain. When they were rewired, this person's brain was rewired in a way to have a curse technique, but he inherited the curse technique of ratio technique from Nanami. So at the very least, this person, whoever he is going to have to play a role in the story moving forward, because he has inherited a curse technique from someone that for the most part we all know and loved. When they were in the manga or even in the anime, they had a specific presence, and I think that this person has to kind of take on that new role because they have inherited Nanami's technique. And I think this kind of ties into what we're most likely going to be seeing in the next few chapters, where most likely at the end of the chapter, we're going to be reintroduced to a new particular individual with a specific curse technique that is going to be participating in the Culling games. And I don't know how long this necessarily will last. It could last until the next chapter. It could last another 5 chapters. Heck, it could last another 10 chapters with how much dialogue we got in this chapter. And a lot of setup needed to have this arc, to have the Culling game go off without a hitch, and having all of the people place their pieces where they need to before the game actually begins. So potentially he is going to have to play a major role in the story moving forward, mainly due to the fact that he has inherited a curse technique that we've known prior, and we understand that there can only exist one curse technique at a time, but that certain curse techniques are unique to particular individuals. So it's just very interesting to just have this thrown in at the end of the actual story, and that this could lead to like huge implications for the story moving forward. It could change how we view curse techniques, curse spirits, like the negative energy of like the cursed world, and like flip it on its head. And it was just throwaway dialogue. I really love that. Even though this chapter was just filled with dialogue and just exposition, it was so dense, and the world is like built fairly well, that just this small piece of information could change the entire world as we know it without changing the foundation of it. And I really wanted to talk about this a little bit more in detail, which is why I made this video. So yeah, that's all I really can talk about when it comes to this chapter of Jujutsu Kaisen at this moment. I gave a little bit of few theories, gave a little bit of explanation, went over a lot that happened in this chapter, connected to a lot of chapters. So if you really enjoyed what I did in this video, leave a like on this video, subscribe to my YouTube channel, leave a comment down below, because when it comes to Jujutsu Kaisen, it really does take a lot from Hunter x Hunter. I haven't really like dived into it, but from if I know anything about Hunter x Hunter is that its system, its power system, is very heavily detailed. It requires a lot of explanations, and from what I'm understanding, from what I know of prior knowledge, Jujutsu Kaisen falls into that category a lot, and you need to really dive into it and look through every piece of dialogue and read through the story multiple times to really like understand and get the gist of everything that's going on and being able to connect the dots. So I'm probably going to try to do this a little bit more. I'm going to probably be more sporadic with the Jujutsu Kaisen discussion videos, but I'm going to try to put them out as much as I can, especially if you like this type of content. And like I said, if you like this type of content, subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit that notification bell for when to be notified for whenever I upload Jujutsu Kaisen content, as well as My Hero Academia content, and just more content about manga in general. If you enjoy this type of content, like, comment, subscribe. Once again, do all that cool jazz, and hopefully I'll be able to catch you in my next video. Goodbye.